Welcome to Late Night Horror Stories and True Crime. Tonight, we're taking you beneath the surface, deep into the tunnels, shadows, and forgotten history of Staten Island. This isn't just a ghost story. It's not just a crime. It's both. A tale born from rumor and fed by real terror. You've heard the stories, haven't you? The man in the van, the stranger with candy, the one who watches from the tree line while your children play too far from home. They call him the boogeyman. They call him Cropsy. They call him the Candyman. But this story isn't fiction. No campfire tale, no made-up monster to scare kids straight. This story happened in the shadows of a ruined institution, in the woods behind quiet neighborhoods, and in the memories of those who still won't speak his name aloud. Let me take you back, not just to the crime, but to the place where evil was born. Because monsters don't just appear, they grow. Staten Island. Once a sleepy borough of modest homes and quiet woods, the kind of place where people settled down after growing tired of the Manhattan noise. But underneath its peace, something else was growing. Something cold, rotten, forgotten. Not far from the rows of brick houses and the hum of the Staten Island Expressway lay a vast compound, now decaying, Willowbrook State School. By the mid-1980s, it was a crumbling skeleton of what had once been a sprawling institution. Its windows were broken, its floors choked with dead leaves and mildew, its hallways dark and bloated with silence. But beneath the building, beneath the peeling walls and rusted stairwells, were the tunnels, a snarl of passageways carved out during the war years, originally meant for maintenance and emergency access. Over the decades, they became something else. Staff used them to transport supplies. Patients were dragged through them when they were too violent or frightened to walk. And when the state began shutting the facility down, slowly, quietly, the tunnels became a dumping ground for forgotten equipment, broken furniture, and the occasional mattress stained with more than time. The neighborhood kids, they dared each other to go down there. They climbed through holes in the fence, ducked under boards nailed hastily over doors, and slipped down into the pitch-black halls with only flashlights and the courage that comes from being young and stupid. They called it exploring, urban spelunking, but in whispers, in the dead of night, when the streets were still, they called it something else. They called it Cropsy's place. And the story always came with one detail, a signature feature that changed slightly with each telling but never disappeared entirely. He had a hook, not a pirate's hook, not something shiny or theatrical. No, this one was cruel. A rusted piece of iron, bent and jagged at the tip. The kind of thing you wouldn't use on animals, much less people. The legend said it replaced his hand, lost long ago in a fire, or maybe cut off by a guard during a fight. The truth was never clear, but what mattered was the sound, the metallic drag of that hook along the tunnel walls, like nails on a chalkboard heard in your dreams. It started, as most legends do, with a story. A girl had gone missing, then another. No bodies, no suspects, just shoes found in the woods. A stuffed animal left on a bench, a scrap of clothing tangled in a tree branch near the creek, and someone said they saw a man. Tall, thin, his face smeared with dirt, living in the tunnels, watching the kids from behind rusted grates. One boy swore he saw the man lick a knife. Another claimed the man followed him home but disappeared before he got to the porch. None of it could be proven. But proof wasn't the point. The fear was real. It spread like fungus in the dark. The police chalked up the missing to runaways, domestic disputes, custody battles gone bad. And the press, when they cared to mention it at all, focused on the neighborhood's poverty, its drugs, its crime. But those who lived there, really lived there, knew something else was wrong. And when Jennifer Schweiger vanished on a humid July day in 1987, the whispers turned to screams. Jennifer was 12 years old. She had Down syndrome. That afternoon, she told her mother she was going for a walk. She never came back. The community rallied. Search parties formed. Flyers were stapled to telephone poles. Strangers knocked on doors asking if anyone had seen her. A small girl with light brown hair and trusting eyes. Days passed, then weeks. And then a local man named Andre Rand was arrested. He was a drifter, a former janitor at Willowbrook, a man with a history of crimes against children. He had been seen near the area where Jennifer disappeared, and someone claimed they saw him leading her by the hand into the woods. That was enough. Police swarmed the tunnels. They picked through the filth and the rot with flashlights and rubber gloves. They found bones, trash, a woman's shoe. They found sleeping bags and makeshift beds, candles, scribbled drawings on the walls, things too strange and too sad to understand. And near the rear exit of the tunnel system, buried shallow in a patch of dirt, they found Jennifer. The air changed that day. The myth became real. And Cropsey, the Candyman, was no longer just a name whispered at sleepovers. He was flesh and blood, shackled, silent, but not gone. Because Jennifer wasn't the first. And she wouldn't be the last. And the tunnels. They're still there. Waiting. And if you listen closely on a windless night, beneath the sounds of the wind in the trees and the hum of the city, you might hear something sharp, dragging across concrete. Clink, clink, clink. A hook. August bled into September. The heat hung heavy in the air, thick with the scent of dead leaves and smog. On Staten Island, the days were long and sluggish, but the nights were different, quieter than they should have been. Summer had always been a time when kids spilled out onto sidewalks with bikes and chalk and dripping popsicles, when porch lights flickered on and parents called their children home by name. But now, the streets emptied early. Windows were shut tight before sunset. Mothers gripped their little ones a little harder. Even the teenagers, the ones who used to laugh off the Cropsey legend, started coming home before dark. The police said they had their man. Andre Rand was in custody. The tunnels were sealed. The nightmare was over. But the parents didn't believe it, because people were still going missing. Not as often, not as boldly. But here and there, a man who vanished on his way home from the late shift. A woman who never came back from walking her dog near the edge of the Willowbrook woods. It never made the front page. There were no candlelight vigils, no headlines, just phone calls and quiet grief. And the growing feeling that something was being hidden, or worse, ignored. The media moved on. The city had other horrors. The crack epidemic, corrupt cops, bodies turning up in the East River. Jennifer Schweiger became just another name on a list. Her family moved away. The flyers faded in the sun. But some people stayed behind. One of them was a man named Victor Castell. Victor had grown up in the shadows of Willowbrook. His father had worked there for 20 years. Maintenance. Not a cruel man. Not abusive, but quiet. Withdrawn. The kind of man who never spoke of work. who came home smelling like bleach and sweat, and sometimes something worse. Victor remembered the nights his father would come home late, eyes bloodshot, clothes damp with humidity from the tunnels. He never asked questions, not back then, not until much later when he began to see things himself. Victor was 13 when Jennifer went missing, old enough to understand fear, but still young enough to be drawn toward it. He remembered the search parties, the helicopters, the yellow tape. He remembered seeing Andre Rand in handcuffs on TV. But what haunted him most wasn't the crime. It was what he saw afterward. 2 weeks after Rand's arrest, Victor was walking home from a friend's house when he passed by the fence that wrapped around the backside of Willowbrook. It was sagging, half collapsed, like a giant had stomped on it and left it to rot. The sun was setting and the trees threw long shadows across the grass. And that's when he saw him. A figure, thin, moving low to the ground, not walking, crawling. At first, Victor thought it was a dog, but then it stood, not fully upright, but enough to see it was a man, or something like one. The figure turned just slightly, and in the fading light, Victor saw eyes, pale and strange, not glowing, nothing supernatural, but empty, like the light behind them had been turned off years ago. And then, glinting briefly in the low sun, he saw the hook, not just held, but attached. Where a hand should have been, there was only rusted iron. It hung heavy at the man's side, twitching slightly as though it had a will of its own. Victor ran. He didn't stop until he reached his porch, lungs burning, sweat slicked down his neck. He tried to tell his mother. She chalked it up to nerves, bad dreams. She told him to stay away from Willowbrook, and that was that. But Victor never forgot. Years passed, the world changed, the internet came, and with it, forums and message boards and amateur sleuths. And one night, when Victor couldn't sleep, he typed in 2 words, missing people. What he found chilled him more than the tunnels ever had, because Jennifer wasn't the only one, and Andre Rand wasn't the only name whispered in the dark. There were others, stories from the 70s, even earlier, adults who vanished near the edge of the woods, close to the hospital grounds. Some were found years later, buried in shallow graves. Others were never found at all. And always there were similarities, the woods, the tunnels, and the hook. Victor began to collect them, clippings, interviews, rumors, a trail of sorrow and silence that ran like a crack through the history of the island. He started a blog under a fake name, reached out to families, asked questions. Most didn't answer, but some did. And what they told him kept him up at night. It was a Tuesday when Victor got the first message. It arrived through a private inbox on an old message board he'd been haunting for months. A digital graveyard of forgotten horror stories, conspiracy threads, and usernames that hadn't posted in years. The message was simple, almost too plain. I saw him too. Near the old boiler tunnel, 1994. Thought I was the only one. The user's name was WRAIT94. No avatar, no post history. The account had been created that day. Victor stared at the message for a long time before he replied. What did you see exactly? The response came within minutes. Tall, dirty, had a coat made of different pieces, like he stitched it together himself. And his hand wasn't a hand. Looked like a hook, not shiny, brown and red, not fake. Victor felt the back of his neck prickle. Another sighting. Another hook. He wasn't alone. Over the next few weeks, the messages came more frequently. Most were vague. Memories of strange noises in the woods, flashes of movement in the corner of an eye, the smell of something rotten just past the fence line. But some were disturbingly specific. One user claimed to have seen the Candyman when she was a teenager. We were playing near the edge of the Willowbrook woods. I heard something, not loud but scraping, like metal on brick. I turned and saw him. He was standing still between two trees. His face was half covered, maybe a cloth or an old gas mask. I don't remember the face, but I remember the hook. It was long and curved, like something used to gut fish. I didn't breathe until he walked away. Victor asked her to draw what she saw. 2 days later, a rough pencil sketch arrived in his inbox. A tall, hunched figure with rags hanging from his limbs and one arm ending in a jagged, rusted hook. He printed it out and pinned it to the growing board in his apartment. The dates, the locations, they were beginning to align. Everything pointed back to the same origin, the tunnels beneath Willowbrook and the connected maze of forgotten infrastructure no one ever mentioned. The old boiler tunnels, the abandoned service routes, the sealed utility passages beneath the hospital. Victor started leaving his apartment, driving to sites where sightings had occurred. Most were nothing. Vacant lots, fenced-off sewer drains, concrete slabs long since repurposed. But once, just past the Willowbrook perimeter, he found something. A shoe, weathered but intact, lying on its side in a tangle of weeds. It was too clean to have been there long. Tucked inside it was a short piece of string, tied in a perfect bow. Victor didn't take it. He just stood there for a long time, staring at the grass and the trees and the edge of the tunnel, entrance nearby. Something was still down there. Late one night, while combing through digital archives, Victor found a sliver of forgotten history buried in the Staten Island Advance from 1972. Boy found wandering near Willowbrook claims man with hook chased him. There was no follow-up, no name, just a quote from a police officer. Likely an overactive imagination. The child is safe with family. Victor dug deeper. In 1961, a maintenance worker had disappeared during a hospital expansion project. The team claimed to hear scraping metal echoing through the closed corridors, but the body was never found. He cross-checked the dates, looked at satellite maps. Then he began to trace something older, a string of disappearances stretching back to the 1940s. Not all in Staten Island, not all close to Willowbrook, but all bearing the same grim details. Disappeared near industrial tunnels. Never found. The sound of metal scraping stone, a tall figure in tattered clothing, and always the hook. Victor documented everything. He converted his apartment into an archive, with red strings stretching across the walls, timelines taped to the ceiling, and a growing list of names, people the world had stopped looking for. And then someone knocked on his door. She introduced herself as Darlene Vega, a former nurse's aide at Willowbrook. Victor had reached out to her months ago. She hadn't replied until now. She didn't sit, didn't take off her coat. She just looked at the wall, then at Victor. "I saw him too," she said. "Not Rand. The other one. The real one." She described a night shift in the winter of 1985. She'd been walking a patient down the corridor when she saw a figure standing in the shadows near the service entrance. "I thought it was just another patient who got loose," she whispered. But then I saw the hook, and the way he stood, like his skin didn't fit right. She never reported it, said she was too scared, that if she said anything they'd think she was crazy, or worse, make her go back. She left the job the following week. Victor didn't try to stop her when she turned and left. He had what he needed. He had the truth. And he knew where he had to go next. Victor waited until the cold returned. October had always carried a certain weight on Staten Island, not just because of Halloween, but because it marked the anniversary of so many disappearances. The trees turned early that year, their leaves burning red and gold, before falling away in wet clumps. The air grew sharp, and the nights carried that same dead silence he remembered from childhood. He parked his car a few blocks away from the Willowbrook ruins, beneath a broken street lamp. The old complex was a carcass now. The upper floors collapsed in places, windows like broken teeth. The fence was new, topped with razor wire, but there were gaps if you knew where to look. Victor had brought a backpack. Inside, a flashlight, spare batteries, a voice recorder, a folding knife, a crowbar, and 3 sealed bottles of water. He'd considered bringing a gun, but something about it felt wrong, like it wouldn't work where he was going. He slipped through the hole, in the fence, and moved quickly across the overgrown lot. The building loomed before him, black and silent. He had found the tunnel entrance weeks ago, a sunken metal door behind the collapsed boiler house. It was sealed with a rusted padlock when he first discovered it, but he'd come back with bolt cutters. Now it waited, yawning open like a wound in the earth. He clicked on the flashlight and stepped inside. The air hit him first, thick with mildew, rotting paper, and something older. Something that smelled like wet meat and copper. The walls were narrow, lined with corroded pipes and broken conduit. Graffiti marked the corners. Strange symbols, dates, names scrawled in childish writing. Somewhere above him the ruins creaked. Victor moved slowly, careful not to trip. Every step echoed. Every sound reminded him he was alone, or that he was supposed to be. 30 minutes in, he found the first mattress. It was soaked and black with age, torn down the middle. A lone shoe rested nearby. Not pink this time, but blue and newer, less faded. Victor crouched and picked it up. The sole was worn, but the stitching was intact. Someone had been down here. Recently. He moved on. Deeper in, the tunnels widened into larger rooms, storage spaces, boiler pits, old shower corridors. One had been painted over with murals long ago, cartoon suns and stick figure animals. Now the paint peeled in strips like burned skin. He turned a corner and his light caught something. Metal, not a pipe, not a fixture. It was a hook, embedded in the wall, dangling from an old chain. Dark brown, flaked with rust, but the wall around it was scratched, gouged, like something had clawed at it, or someone had tried to get free. Victor lifted the voice recorder and pressed record. "This is Victor Castell," he whispered. "October 17th. I've entered the Willowbrook tunnels. I've found something, a hook, mounted in the wall. Appears old, possibly symbolic, continuing forward." He didn't hear the sound behind him until it was too late. A soft scrape, metal on stone, not loud, but moving. Victor spun around, shining the light into the darkness behind him. Nothing, just the narrow tunnel, pipes and shadows. But he heard it again. Closer now. A drag, a shuffle. The faint click of metal tapping brick. He backed away slowly. His breath caught in his throat. Then the light flickered, just once, then again, and then it died. He fumbled for the spare battery, cursing under his breath, his hands slick with sweat. He slapped the battery in, smacked the light, and it came back to life, just in time to see something vanish around the corner ahead. Not a shape, a suggestion of one, a shadow that moved without noise. He raised the recorder again. Something's moving down here, I don't know what. Saw a shape, not human, not fully. Something tall, humanoid, possibly. He hesitated. Possibly the subject of the Cropsey sightings? He kept walking. The air grew colder, the walls closer, the silence heavier. And then he saw the door, old, metal, bent in the middle like it had been struck from the inside. A heavy, rusted bar stretched across it, held in place by thick chains looped through old bolts. On the door, scratched in deep gouges, were the words, "He waits." Victor stared, and then behind him, that sound again. Clink, drag, clink. This time, it was louder, closer. He turned just in time to see a long shadow sweep across the corridor behind him. And something else. The glint of metal, curved and jagged. The hook. He ran, blind, stumbling. His light bouncing wildly off the walls as he tore through the tunnel. His shoulder scraped concrete. His breath was fire in his chest. He didn't stop until he found the collapsed stairwell he'd passed earlier. He ducked inside, hid in the corner, killed the light, and waited. Minutes passed. Then slowly, the scrape began again, just outside the stairwell. Clink, clink, drag. Victor held his breath, and in the darkness, something breathed back. Victor sat in the dark, trying to slow his breathing. Every muscle in his body ached from the sprint, from the crouch, from the tension that clenched his chest like a vice. The darkness pressed in around him like something alive, pulsing, unwelcoming. He hadn't heard the sound again, not for 5 minutes, then 10. Still, he didn't dare move. Eventually, he flicked the flashlight back on, just a narrow beam this time, pointed at the floor. Dust and rat droppings, his own smeared footprints, no blood. But also, no hook. He emerged slowly from the collapsed stairwell. The tunnel was empty, still. The only noise came from above, wind scraping dead leaves across the distant surface. Victor pressed record again. Possibly hallucinated presence. Experienced visual and auditory stimuli consistent with hysteria, but I saw something, it followed me, I heard the hook. He turned toward the far end of the tunnel. I'm going deeper. And he did. The layout changed the further he went. The tunnels were no longer straightforward. They curved and twisted like veins under skin. The flashlight would reveal doors, old, metal, swollen with rust and time. Some were cracked open, revealing rooms filled with collapsed shelves and broken file cabinets. Others remained sealed, as if they were meant to never be opened again. He passed what looked like a long disused nurse's station. Counters collapsed, broken clipboards strewn across the floor. One wall still had remnants of laminated posters. How to wash your hands. How to report abuse. The irony made Victor's stomach churn. Another 20 minutes in, he stopped to rest, sat on a section of upturned pipe, and pulled a water bottle from his pack. The plastic crackled in the silence. He took a slow sip. Then he saw it. On the wall beside him, partially hidden beneath a layer of mildew and grime, was a message scrawled in red. I seen him. He takes 'em. Next to it, a crude drawing of a man with a long coat and one arm ending in a jagged curve. Victor felt the breath hitch in his throat. This wasn't the work of vandals. It looked old. ancient in graffiti terms. The paint had run and dried decades ago. He stood, reached for the recorder. This location contains additional evidence of the entity. Markings on the wall match earlier descriptions. Reference to abduction. Continuing search. He turned a corner and found stairs. They led down. Against his better judgment, he followed. The lower level was worse. The air was thicker, colder. The flashlight caught the shimmer of moisture on the walls, a film of slime that hadn't been disturbed in years. The floor crunched beneath his boots. Debris, glass, something softer he didn't want to identify. At the base of the stairs, the hall widened. It was lined with doors, some open, others forced closed by swelling and rust. Victor peered inside the first open one and gagged. Cages, actual metal-barred cages, human-sized. Empty now, but still stained with age and rust. Each one had a small plastic tag nailed to the wall beside it, though the ink had long since faded. He moved quickly past them. The next room was worse. Children's furniture, tiny desks, rotted books, torn coloring pages still pinned to the walls. Everything was decayed, melted by time and water and neglect. And on the far side of the room, scrawled in a looping, shaking hand, "Candyman comes in threes." Victor felt bile rise in his throat. He staggered back, almost dropped the flashlight. The beam danced wildly across the ceiling. He turned and saw a figure at the end of the hallway. Tall, still, cloaked in darkness. The hook glinted. Victor ran. He didn't remember the turns, didn't recall the obstacles, only that he kept running, his breath ragged, his legs burning. He rounded a corner and smacked into a door. It gave way, and he tumbled into a small maintenance chamber. He slammed the door shut behind him and jammed the crowbar through the handle. He fell back, panting, and then he looked around. The walls were lined with photos, hundreds of them, pinned, taped, stapled to every surface. Adults. Blurry snapshots, IDs, candid shots taken from a distance, faces mid-turn, eyes wide, unaware, and beneath every photo was a name and a date. Victor moved closer. The names matched the missing: Schweiger, Hughes, Pereira, Gafforio. But others he didn't recognize. Names that had never made the news, people who had simply vanished. And in the center of the far wall, larger than the rest, was a drawing. Black charcoal, a man in rags. One hand normal, the other a jagged rusted hook. Victor lifted the recorder with a trembling hand. "I've found what I think is a shrine. A memorial. No, a trophy room, documenting dozens of disappearances, possibly more. This is confirmation. Someone, something, has been collecting them." Outside the room, he heard a sound. Clink, clink, drag, getting closer. Victor didn't speak. He just sat in the center of the room and waited. The recorder was still running. Victor sat cross-legged in the center of the trophy room, staring at the wall of faces. The beam of his flashlight had started to dim, its cone shrinking by the minute. He didn't bother replacing the batteries. He didn't plan to be here much longer. Outside the door, the sounds had stopped. Not because whatever was out there had gone away. No, Victor was sure it was still there, listening, waiting, and breathing. That wet, heavy sound had returned. Not loud, but close. Like it was just beyond the door. The room was suffocating. He clicked the recorder. "My name is Victor Castell," he said, his voice dry and cracked. "If someone finds this, know that I came looking for answers. I found them. I found too much." He paused, looking up at the drawings. "He's real. The Candyman, the one they used to scare kids. He's not just a story. He lives down here, or something like him does. I saw it. I saw the hook. The air shifted. A sound like fingers brushing the other side of the wall. Victor stood slowly. His knees ached from the cold floor. The dimming flashlight in his hand cast a nervous beam around the room. The photos fluttered slightly in the still air, as if disturbed by a breath that did not belong to him. Then came the knock. Software, muffled. Once, twice, then a scrape. The crowbar across the door rattled in its latch. Victor backed away. He considered running, but there was nowhere to run. Just more tunnels, more dark. And something told him that no matter how fast he moved, it would find him. So he did the unthinkable. He stepped forward. He pulled the crowbar loose. And he opened the door. Nothing. The corridor was empty, still, but colder now, as if something had passed through only moments earlier. Victor stepped out, flashlight low. The hallway stretched in both directions, like an open throat. He turned left, back toward the direction he thought he came from. The air was heavier now, tinged with the scent of rust and rot. He moved slowly. The sound came again. Clink, clink, drag. It echoed behind him, then ahead, then from the side. He was being circled. "No more running," he muttered. "You want me? Come and get me." He turned into an open chamber. What might once have been a laundry room. Tiles shattered, old machines rusted into the floor. He backed into a corner and braced himself. Flashlight aimed toward the door. The silence deepened. Then he saw it, just a sliver of movement in the hallway, a shadow longer than it should have been. Then the arm, the hook, long, curved, caked with rust and something darker. Victor held his breath. The figure stepped into the doorway, tall, cloaked in rags that dragged behind it like spiderwebs soaked in filth. Its face was obscured by shadow, but Victor saw the jaw, crooked, twitching. Its other hand was normal, pale, clawed. The Candyman raised his hook. Victor didn't scream. He didn't move. He clicked the recorder one last time. "If you find this, don't follow me." The light went out. Victor Castell was never seen again. A week later, 2 hikers discovered his abandoned car near the ruins of Willowbrook. Authorities searched the area but found nothing. His apartment, however, told a different story. A wall covered in strings and photos, printouts, drawings, dozens of names, and a package. Inside was a recorder. On it, Victor's voice, scratchy, fading but intact. The last tape, the one that told the story of the real Candyman. And somewhere beneath Staten Island, the tunnels remain, waiting. Thank you for joining us this evening for another chilling descent into the unknown. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, the story of the real Candyman, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more late-night horror stories and true crime. We bring you stories that linger, tales that whisper long after the lights go out. Have a theory about what really happened beneath Staten Island? Heard a legend in your own town that sounds a little too real? Leave a comment below. We're always listening. Until next time, lock your doors, check the shadows, and remember, some stories are more than just stories. Good night.